Okay. So, Dr. Amin, first of all, thanks a lot for accepting our request and, having an uh, conversation with us on specifically on a topic which is very close to our heart, probably, because we all believe that microbiome is something which is very plays a key role in our health and longevity, right? And there have been a lot of as far as Asian market is concerned, there's a lot of lack of information or acknowledgement that these bugs living inside our body are doing wonders for our health, right? Or maybe bad things also, depending upon how we are keeping them. Right? Uh, so I think that is something I really wanted because I think you come from a very deep expertise background, right? And Mr. Rupinder also comes from a very deep biotech background. And before we start, I will give you a brief about myself, right? So I'm from India. I've probably, worked at diverse sectors, mostly in strategy and finance functions. I've built a lot of, businesses in financing space. I've raised thousands of dollars for millions of dollars for my organizations, both on the growth and the expansion side, right? And this Gene Freakletics was started 4 years back and is all linked to the issues my family members face, right? Dealing with chronic diseases. So specifically, people very close to me, my mother has been diabetic for 35 years now, right? And he still is dealing with the pain every day, right? And the biggest problem we have is that, or biggest, shocking thing what we faced was my father was detected with stage 4 colon cancer, right? And we couldn't figure out why it is, and even the healthcare practitioners in India do not know, why it developed, and most of them are focused as a reactive approach, right? So focused on suppressing the tumor rather than finding out what developed it. So, that's what drove me to, build Gene Freakletics to get into understand microbiome, right? And I must have read more than 30,000 plus research papers around it, analyzing the functions, studying the role of gut microbiome, the oral microbiome, the vaginal microbiome, right? Why human DNA is not the solution, why we need to focus on the microbiome. So that's what made us build Gene Freakletics, right? And then that's a brief about myself, and I asked Mr. Rupinder also to share his story, and then we can have you speak. We can discuss a lot about the microbiome. Yeah.
Yeah, so my brief, yeah,
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so my brief would be I thought I'll be very brief, So I'm a biotechnologist, gold medalist, then worked with multinationals like Becton Dickinson. So I was heading Becton Dickinson business for India. I filed 4 Indian patents, 1 PCT application as a scientist while working with a pharma company. Then worked with Carry Group as regional director Asia. Then I have been entrepreneur twice. I sold my equity, and now I'm working with Gene Freakletics, because something very close to my heart as well. And that's where now over to you, Dr. Wayne. Would like to hear from you more and more.
No, thank you again. Really, it is definitely my pleasure to kind of to sit down with like-minded and speak about microbiome. And people tells me like you do speak on a daily basis about microbiome. Don't you get bored? I said, how come I get bored while we still don't know that much of the microbiome? I mean, we every day. I honestly sometimes I ask myself, would I be able to publish anything about the microbiome tomorrow? And it happens that yes, because every day there is something about it new, and every day we're learning more from all the microbiomes that are already mentioned. I'm a microbiologist by training. I've been working with microbes like since the last 19 years. Worked with microbes from the desert, where I was trying to understand how these microbes resist to high salinity concentrations. I designed bioreactors for these microbes to grow in a bioreactor and understood how the proteins from a bioinformatic perspective would resist to the salinity, and worked with other microbes that basically infect neonatals, and they are one of the highest cause of death for neonates, Streptococcus agalactiae. I was trying to understand during my PhD how this bacteria basically resists to almost all antibiotics, and there was only one, colistin, that this bacteria was still sensitive to it. And I remember during the first month of my PhD supervisor came to me with a book thick like this, and he threw it on my table, and it was labeled probiotic and prebiotic, while I was actually working on completely different field. And he said, "This is the future of medicine and health." And I said, "This is not what I work on today." Yeah, he said, "Listen, finish your PhD, but maybe do this after." And I kept that in mind. I dig deeper into these probiotics and microbiome field and so on. And yeah, I mean, I traveled throughout Europe to Ireland, where I was working with the AI company, trying to understand how we could use artificial intelligence to predict from food peptides that would enable us to modulate the microbiome in a way. And lately, I was with a startup working on the skin microbiome this time, trying to create new probiotics and live biotherapeutics to modulate skin issues and disorders and so on. Yeah, so that was a little bit all of that. But in all of this, my passion about microbiome goes beyond, and I think I've realized at some point that if we'd like to make a change, we have to start by educating the people about the importance of this microbiome. And I think this is the purpose of this call as well, because a lot of people don't really understand what's the value of the microbiome to their health. Although you would always find some people fighting your message and say, yeah, your microbiome is nonsense and what so, and it's a hype. But again, we try to really bring the right science, the robust science, and share it with the people across the globe.
Great,
Wonderful.
great to learn that, okay, and to start off, so let's start off with this, because I'll just give you a brief background about the Indian market as far as microbiome is concerned, right? So we have a very handful of companies working on the microbiome side. Mostly 99% work on the gut microbiome, rather I'll say 99.999%, right? So that's what we think, that these microbes only live in large intestine, and then most of the companies are focused on the clinical studies, right? Or maybe clinical investigations. Nobody's really actually working on the solving the problem of ultimate consumers or the patients, right? And the understanding and the biggest flaw in the Indian market is that people listen a lot about DNA, right? Our genes, right? Human genes, which is 25,000 human genes what we have, right? And nobody actually give that importance to microbiome or the bacteria and fungi and yeast and all those bugs living on inside our body, right? So to start off, how do you probably, define microbiome, or how do you make a lot of such people explain that, why not DNA, why microbiome, right? That's something is I wanted to discuss at one go first.
It's a great question. I think, in my opinion, microbiome is some people say microbiome or microbiota. The ones who says microbiota are the ones who basically refer to the bacteria by themselves, and obviously archaea and so on. A lot of people do as well reduce the microbiota to just the bacteria, while within the microbiome or microbiota there is bacteria, there is fungi, and there is yeast, and so on and so forth. So it's not just the bacteria themselves. And more importantly, the microbiome word englobes the fact that there is the bacteria and what they actually produce as metabolites, which basically these bacteria produce these metabolites, short-chain fatty acids, vitamins, and neurotransmitters in our gut, on our skin, as vitamin D and so on, to basically help us cope with whatever is happening there. I don't like to reduce as well the microbiome to the gut, because we actually have also microbes inside our oral cavity, on our skin, on the vaginal microbiome, as well as on the soil, on the plants, on the walls. We even have a cloud. Like, there is a cloud microbiome. There is a notion of that, right? And all these are the ones basically that influence in our health in one way or another. We do hear it today about all this gut axis got liver access, got brain access, got skin access, and so on and so forth, because they do communicate in one way or another. Our microbiome, basically, we get it from what we eat, if we speak about the gut, from what we interact with, from where we live, the environment. If you look into my microbiome, my wife's and daughters, we're very closely similar, simply because we do share, the same environment, share very likely the same food, except for my 9 months daughter. I don't eat her food, so I rather avoid that. But in general, there is also studies that show that we do have a community microbiome. So people living in the same communities share similar microbiome. Give you an example. If you live in India, you have a specific Indian microbiome. So that is defined because of the food you guys eat and the weather and so on. India is big, so maybe there is different microbiomes within India. But if we take you from India and we put you in Japan, where we ask you to start eating rice and seaweed for a month, the likelihood of your microbiome to change is very high for two reasons. Number one, we have what we call the microbiome is distributed into two. And this is the notion that not every scientist in the microbiome field refer to or use. The microbiome, we have what we call the engrafted microbiome, microbiota, is literally like more or less the keystone species that are almost in every human being. They don't vary, like they're there, solidified, and they usually stabilize around the 4 years, 5 years old of age, right? And we have the second microbiome is called the environmental biofilm, which is this microbiome that shifts with time, shifts with the food you eat, and so on and so forth. So if we put you in Japan, what will change is not your engrafted microbiota, not these microbes that basically stick with you from your 4 years until you die. It changed this environmental biofilm, which basically will cope with the food you basically started eating, with the weather in Japan, and so on and so forth. These microbes basically interact with the human body on a regular basis. So they get cues, they get signals, they react to those signals, and so on and so forth. So if you take you in another example, and we put you in a very highly polluted, I mean, I know that you live in a nature kind of location, but we put you in a very highly polluted location, your skin microbiota will start reacting to that, and you will lose some diversity of that microbiota because the pollution, right? So what does mean that losing some diversity might actually impact your ability to fight those diseases. If we take another example now, people living as hunter-gatherers in these tribes, we took them in one study from Justin Sonnenberg, Stanford study was recently published. They took these people, their gut microbiome, and they compared it to people living in California. And they looked into what are these people, how diverse they are. They found that the people basically living in hunter-gatherers, they had very high diversity compared to the people from California. They even had 732 more species that were never been found in people living in California. That tells you that basically, okay, something is wrong. So these people have a very high diversity compared to people living in California, which is industrialized kind of communities. What we say here, these two groups, hunter-gatherers and Californians, they were basically both healthy volunteers. None of them was sick, but one of them was highly diverse. The other one was very much less diverse and had even less strain diversity. But they both of them were healthy. What we're losing here is, in fact, we're losing some bacteria, but some in this industrialized population, we have kept some functions that our microbiota managed to kind of recover the functions that we've lost because we've lost these microbes. And this is the role of what we call the microbiome or the metabolome, these all the molecules that your microbiome is producing for you to kind of keep you healthy. So this is a notion that I would like to emphasize on, that losing some bacteria might probably not kill you or make you sick, but losing the functions of those bacteria might do so, right? So it's very important that you know that the function is very, very important in this kind of question.
Yeah, that's a great
Excellent. I think,
insight.
yeah,
Yes, sir.
awesome. Yeah,
It's a
please go
great
ahead.
insight. I have another thing because I just want to add on this, right? So this is what
Please.
we felt, right? Me and Mr. Rupinder also thought the same way when we were working on this, right? So accept us, every country, every company in India right now are focused on the alpha and beta diversity, right? So they tell, okay, I have I come and say municiphilia, right, which can give me bitrate, is a potential to give me bitrate, but it doesn't mean it will give bitrate, right? So most of the companies are doing that. They're focusing on alpha, beta, and diversity also because the price of sequencing 16S rRNA, it's obviously V4 is really, really cheap as compared to going for a whole genome metagenomics or metatranscriptomics. So what is your view, probably what is your message to such companies who do not focus on the metabolites, but they focus on the existence and the presence and the alpha beta diversity of the microbes in the gut?
Very good question. So I think, so number one, we have to acknowledge that it is good that someone needs to start somewhere. And the fact that technology is developing with time and is way more affordable today to do a microbiome sequencing than it was yesterday. So today, for instance, you can do a microbiome, a full amplicate. I mean, literally you sequence the whole piece of 16S that tells you which exact strain is that with literally $37. I mean, that's nothing compared to what usually it was with around hundreds and hundreds of dollars, right? So today it is affordable and it's feasible. So for me, the people that do not go to the species level today in their analysis, they probably did not do their market research in terms of how cheap today is doing that sequencing. Or maybe I also like to think positively of everybody. They just didn't have access to that technology wherever they are. So, and that's I send the message to all these sequencing providers. Please share your technology with everybody else across the world. Speaking about Illumina, speaking about nanopore and others. I know that they aren't available in every country, and I think it will be good because I know that, for instance, African countries don't have access to these kind of technologies. I did have in my lab a minion, which is basically the size of a phone,
Yeah.
which is insane. That's a sequencer which tells you on a real-time basis what are you sequencing, and it costs you, like, if you do the math, it probably around 20 euros if you really do a proper experimentation. So today it is feasible to go and do that kind of sequencing, to go to literally to the strain level. I don't really like when to see people reporting on a film level or on, on a species, and like, why would you do that? Today we can go to the strain levels with very cheap money. So that's level one. Level two is basically connecting these bacteria to whatever they are producing. As you said, it is rightfully, if having Akkermansia municiphilia that is known to in obesity or diabetes and so on, doesn't per se mean that it will produce XYZ. What the body needs the molecules that these bacteria are producing. However, some studies also show that we sometimes also need the bacteria itself because they do have epitopes on them, which will signal to other immune cells as to create this kind of immunity and so on, and all the downstream reaction that happens. So having the bacteria definitely is very important. Having the metabolite that produce even important. In my opinion, it's even more important. It's what pathways are triggered. Literally, if you have the bacteria here, the bacteria will produce the metabolites, let's say butyrate as a short-chain fatty acid. What I want to know is where this metabolite is going. What pathway is triggering? Is this metabolite crossing the gut lining and going to brain, to kind of prevent any damages there through the vagus nerve? Or is it going to liver? Or is it going to skin? There are studies showing that there is almost 50% of butyrate somehow, we don't know how, reaches the skin layer. And it's also shown that that butyrate reaching the skin layer can actually prevent from psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, and other skin issues. Not to mention what happens also in the fatty liver disease, into the gut-brain axis. But these metabolites need to reach wherever they're going to. And this is, I think, today we haven't reached that level of complexity yet, simply because the dimension of looking into this is a little bit more complex, and not every company has the mean to map every metabolite in each human pathway where it's going. But I think that will be probably the right way of doing it in the future, and there are some technologies moving towards that. Um, Today, also, metabolomics is also getting cheaper and cheaper. You don't really need to go and do targeted metabolomics, meaning that you just literally, sorry, untargeted metabolomics, which will tell you whatever everything is in there. Try to do, at least to start with your offering, maybe start by using targeted metabolomics. Like, okay, assess what are short-chain fatty acids that are in there, branch fatty acids, and so on, things that promote health, things that promote disease, and so on. But I think we're moving towards functionality rather than composition. But in my opinion, we should probably keep both functionality and composition to give a more holistic kind of picture on what's going on.
Yeah, that's a great insight. That's
That's
a
a nice
future
point.
actually. Yeah.
Mhm. And how do you, I mean, just a question, probably I'm jumping, but then how do you commercially involved on the microbiome side? Are you really helping the patients in some way or through your work, or you are doing more for research at the moment?
So at the moment, with the Microbiome Mavericks, this is my company, which basically started as an audiobook. Yeah? So it wasn't brand or something or a company even. It's an
Okay.
audiobook that I really created with my mission of saving the human microbiome from extinction. And I said, okay, what's the first layer on this mission? It's, in my opinion, is education. So I really started by interviewing microbiome founders like yourselves in the business and trying to get their vision and their version of the story about what's happening inside the startups. Because what I think, in my opinion, to convince customers and patients today to use this very innovative technology, which is the microbiome, they need at least to give a view on what's actually happening inside, from like a view from the inside, what's happening. So I really wanted to create that, and so this was an audiobook with 14 founders, which was very successful on the launch. And then afterwards, I created as now is Microbiome Mavericks is a recognized brand and a consulting company. We're basically still working from a research perspective with
Okay.
microbiome companies, helping them develop the technology, improving their message communication, and so on. But on the other level, also continue doing this podcasts and education about the microbiome. So I honestly, sometimes I get patients actually reaching to me and say, okay, can you help me with this? Because I've tried every medicine out there and I couldn't actually do it. I always respond with the first thing saying, I'm not a doctor and I would not be able to recommend you any medicine, but I would be able to guide you on the microbiome and how you probably could leverage it. Maybe a message that you can share with your gastroenterologist, your dermatologist, and so on, to tell, okay, this is what I've learned about the microbiome. Can you just maybe guide me towards that? And I really, one of my biggest missions today is spreading the message to professionals, because professionals are trusted. Like, one of the latest surveys was released by Biocodex, Microbiota Institute, and Foundation about the knowledge about microbiome in 6 countries: US, China, Portugal, Spain, France, and others. And the survey was very shocking, because literally 1 out of 5 people didn't really know what the microbiome is and how actually can take care of it. But what was interesting, in my opinion, when you dig deeper in the report, that people were trusting more their doctors or their GPs when they tell them about the information, simply because, okay, you're a doctor and you're my doctor, so I'm gonna take your word for that. So I think today, if we would like to really bring the microbiome science to the next level, which is getting this science to the consumer and to the patients, we should reduce the gap between the science and the physicians and the health professionals and healthcare providers, because there's the one that basically sees the patients and sees the consumer on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Right. So I think you're right. So how do we convince the healthcare professionals, doctors, physicians about the need of microbiome, and then link it to the benefits of the patients and all. So I think very well said, Dr. Mean. Uh, so Sushant, over to you. Probably you can
Yeah.
also throw some
Yeah.
insights into what we are doing, and yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good point. I wanted to just extend a bit before I share what we're doing. So maybe mix both, right? So essentially, you're right, because if you see, and my apologies if some listeners, maybe doctors, feel it bad that way, but doctors were never taught nutrition in their medical school, right? So if that's been taught that you have this symptom, you have this drug, right? So it's like a marriage between symptom and drug, right? So that's a standard intervention which everyone knows. So if me and you go to the same doctor, we have the same sort of issue, right? They will be taking the same sort of intervention, right? Because what we do is most of the doctors work in isolation. So if someone is having type 2 diabetes, they will say starting metformin, or someone is having, blood pressure, so they'll starting statins and a lot of these things, right? So essentially, you're right that there's a huge gap in understanding and individual biology, right? And and obviously, given the fact that 99% of genes expressed in our body are belong to microbes, not to humans, so essentially a lot of understanding the microbiome, and specifically as we discuss the function of the microbiome, the molecules being produced, how these molecules are triggering either good things or maybe triggering production of pro-inflammatory molecules like cytokines, which is making our immune system overactive, making our genes overexpressed, making us develop disease, right? So I think that's a really valid point which you brought. So doctors, as well as I'll share that in Indian market still only I'll say 0.0001% doctors understand microbiome, right? So if you go and talk to a doctor, he'll say, "Oh, I don't know what this is," or probably this is all bullshit crap. We don't talk about this, right? So just focus on your medicine, right? So essentially, there's a lot of specifically for diseases such as I'll give you some examples because that's what's happening in India, right? So three major what I have seen probably, and if you can also have Dr. Amine here. One is type 2 diabetes, right? So we recently WHO claimed that more than 100 million people have type 2 diabetes, right? And the thing is, all the interventions are focused either on metformins or taking high protein diets or reducing carbohydrate content, right? We don't go beyond. So from a food ontology perspective, we don't go beyond protein, carbs, and fats and fiber because food has thousands of other bioactive molecules. Now, how these molecules interact with our microbiome is what matters, right? So that is one. Other is the the disease which is developing in child, and again one of my articles came today on autism, right? So again, autism, we know child who are autistic have uh, a lot of digestive issues, right? So it's linked to gut microbiome. Again, it goes to mother's microbiome even before the child is born, right? So most of the interventions are focused on antidepressants, increasing the concentration of serotonin, right? And then third one is obviously cancer, right? So cancer is, so in a latest, figure, it came that 13% of the Indian population, adult population, have very high risk of developing cancer, right? Which is, which you see is much more than that of people suffering from type 2 diabetes, right? And we really don't have solutions, right? So we really are still focused on chemotherapy, immune therapies, targeted therapies, right? And waiting for death to come or waiting for miracle to happen because we really don't know whether it is going to help or not, right? So again, this is something we have been always saying that the metabolism of even chemotherapy and radiation therapy also depends upon your microbiome, right? So probably you're right in that respect. So probably if possible, if you could share your views on maybe the role of microbiome in cancer. That really
Or
no, we'll continue this, no problem. We can
okay,
continue for
cool.
another. Yeah. So I was asking about the role of microbiome in cancer. That's something which I was thinking. Probably you can shed
Yeah,
some
so
light.
I think there were also quite a number of studies basically working on this and showing this we call the tumor microenvironment and how some bacteria basically could basically even promote cancer. How could even some gut bacteria reduce the efficacy of some chemotherapy, like immune check inhibitors, for instance. I actually worked on one of bacteria which was also involved in colorectal cancer. It's called Fusobacterium nucleatum. What's funny about this bacteria is basically it's an oral bacteria.
Yeah.
So usually it lives in the oral cavity, and
Yeah.
somehow it ends up in your colon and causing the colorectal cancer. It's actually one of the I think if my memory is correct, is number two in terms of what causes colorectal cancer. And this bacteria has a set of arsenal basically allowing the bacteria through a protein called FAB2, which they produce, to basically promote, protect the cancer environment and push away the immune cells, which is fascinating. Other bacteria basically also, as I said earlier, can block the efficacy of some immune check inhibitors and reducing their efficacy and thereby prolonging the duration of the disease, or even some people basically don't even recover from it. What happens as well today, there is even a recent study basically showing that when we look into the microbiome and its influence in cancer, we can sometimes try to look into the metabolome, and basically all these metabolites that these bacteria are producing in blood, and try to use this to diagnose specific and different types of cancer. What's funny about it is that this study showed that if you use the wrong databases when you're actually building your study around the microbiome, specifically in this kind of diseases such as cancer, you might end up by having the wrong conclusions, and you might even having completely the wrong diagnosis. So when it comes to the link with microbiome to cancer, I think we have still a lot to learn. But as this very, very specific, in my opinion, the route to go, and that's what some of the studies are showing here, is not to go with the bacteria themselves, is really to go with the metabolites that are producing and try to really fine tune it in there, because that's how we could get more in-depth knowledge about what's happening in there, and we may be able to diagnose some types of cancer earlier than we are doing today with conventional medicine.
Okay, great. So that's what, that's really important, because, that is, frankly, still the general practitioners are not considering, the role of microbiome, or even fecal microbiome transplants, which which again is going to be a future for health, right? Because that's one of the way to bring good bacteria back inside the body, right? So that is something which is really important, right? So again, this was I really want to understand, because what you rightly mentioned, that Physiobacterium nucleatum, I know it's in mouth, and sometimes through our saliva it goes, it travels, crosses the stomach. If we have low stomach acid, we have acid reflux. So it's a clear biomarker that if you are suffering from acid reflux, right, and if you have oral microbial dysbiosis, there's a high chance that you may develop the colorectal cancer, because this bacteria can, or maybe IBD also, right? So what I'll find that Physiobacterium nucleatum is also involved in development of irritable bowel syndrome, right? And that's an oral microbiome, which is really fascinating, right? It's something really fascinating for me also, that how a bacteria in a mouth can cause diabetes, can regulate blood pressure, can cause IBD, can cause cancer, right? So these or even arthritis, right? Or even dementia, right? So this is really so that's why I'll tell you a brief about what we are doing, right? So essentially, our focus is on functions, right? Not on the existence, right? So we started with the gut microbiome. We converted the lot of these functions into various pathways, right? So we tell the state of pathways and the activity level of various pathways. Based on that, we recommend nutrition interventions, right? So what food you should eat, what food you should minimize, what food you should avoid, what food you should moderate. Right now, after 3 months, it changes. After 6 months, it changes. And even what specific probiotics, prebiotics, supplements your body needs right now, right?
Nice.
In specific quantity, right? So that's what we started with the gut microbiome, right? And that's our flagship product. We've been doing this for the last 4 years now, right? Then we also have an vaginal microbiome project, right? So we there we focus not on the activities but on the existence of the bacteria, right? So we focus on promoting how we can promote a lot of lactobacillus, right, inside the vagina, right? And maybe suppress, how can we suppress mycoplasma and all are there, right? So and then recently we are on process of launching an oral microbiome product now, right? So we'll be converting the oral microbiome into functional pathways, right? Like we'll be telling you what is your nitric oxide production, what is your risk of periodontal disease, right? Or maybe or even Then providing the right sort of food interventions, right? So if someone has a dry mouth, what specific food molecules your body needs, your mouth microbes needs to actually balance it, or even hygiene recommendations, like what kind of toothpaste you should use, right? Whether you should use a high fluoride or what is the harmful effects of saccharins and parabens and all of these things are in toothpaste, right? So essentially our focus is we're building this entire platform, right? Using system biology and obviously the technology, right? To
Yes.
actually tell that what is going on inside the body, as you rightly pointed out, right? And then giving the right sort of interventions to regulate their biology, right? So obviously, we want to help doctors. We want more people to, take this report to the doctor so the doctor can understand their biology better, because we anyways can't replace a doctor here, right? So
Yeah.
that's a overall of what we are doing, right? And uh, I think probably have your views on what we are building, your feedback.
No, that is excellent, I think, and obviously thanks for sharing. I think on all means, as we've just discussed, going to the functional and including from a system biology perspective, from a diet and nutrition, as you said, we're not replacing doctors here, and we need
Yeah,
this conventional medicine to still exist and so on.
yeah.
But I think microbiome science as a field is also here to bring another puzzle to the bigger question. I don't think we can just easily fix any problem by just fixing the microbiome itself,
Yeah,
because the system is more complex to that. But we need to consider the microbiome as a system that is actually moving. It's literally an organ. There is a microbiome weigh between 1 to 2 kilo as an
yeah,
estimation.
yeah,
That's a true organ that we need to look into that. As to the vaginal microbiome, it is also one of my dearest, I would say, and most. It's actually I place it the infant and the vaginal microbiome on my high priority list for two reasons. For the vaginal microbiome, and I think women's health is one of the field that is not that studied, not that research, unfortunately, and which is insane in my opinion. We don't have that much of studies on the vaginal microbiome. We've actually recently got this new interesting approach of the vaginal microbiota transplantation, where we actually take vaginal swabs from healthy women to women with bacterial vaginosis and others, and see if we can improve pregnancy rates or in vitro fertilization and so on and so forth, which is very nice. But the woman's health herself influence the infant. So if we do start wrongly from the beginning, from the mother, we end up by having a dysbiosis potentially in the infant if they would be born by C-section, or they might not get breastfeeding and so on. And the detrimental effects, we can have them later in the years. So if you are focusing on modulating and improving the health of the gut microbiota, and as well as focusing into the vaginal microbiome, I think you've basically got a very interesting holistic approach where you can improve both. And this is we need to focus on the population that is coming, on these generations, new generations, and trying to improve their health through improving their mother's health and the vaginal microbiota. So I definitely applaud you on the approach, and I think you're on the right track, basically focusing on the system biology, microbiome science, nutrition, and taking it holistically, not just from the gut, but also from the vaginal perspective.
yeah, yeah. So basically, we are just blending this gut and vagina, because vagina alone cannot tell a lot of things, because the gut microbiome functions would impact other physiology as well, right? So we are actually blending both sequencing methods here. So anyone who signs up for the vagina microbiome product, he goes to both the sequencing for the vagina as well as gut, right? That is something. And so I briefly wanted you to touch upon one more thing before we close this discussion. Last thing, because there's this I've seen a lot of these probiotic supplements, right? So what is your view on the probiotic supplement? Should the standard over the counter probiotic supplements really work, right? Or we really need a sort of precision supplementation, right, based on the gut microbiome or the oral microbiome, right, or the vaginal microbiome.
I mean, I think so. I shared one day a post about this on LinkedIn, and so if you're sick and you think you have anemia, the first thing you would do, you go to your doctor, get your blood drawn, and you do a blood analysis to see the levels of iron and plasma and so on and so forth, and compare yourself with the normal range of standards as is there, right? So if you're missing iron, your doctor would say, listen, you have anemia and you're probably missing iron. So here you go, take this iron as a supplement. But you wouldn't take iron just because you're feeling not good, because you wouldn't know whether you're actually missing iron. And actually, people don't really do that. They refrain from taking some iron supplementation just because they don't know whether they actually miss iron. And sometimes overdosing your iron probably wouldn't be a good thing, right?
Mm.
So why wouldn't we do the same thing for when we actually are supplementing with probiotics? I mean, there is a handful of today available and well-researched probiotic strains and species. I mean, it's a very handful. Like we're talking about Bifidobacterium, Lactobacillus, Streptococcus, and very few others. Obviously, have many strains, but not that much of diversity. So
Mm.
if your gut is very highly enriched in bifidobacteria specific strain, and you're taking that same probiotic, the likelihood of you to get an improvement is very limited because you actually have that bacteria in your gut. So taking that one is like you're taking a cup of water and pouring it in a sea. I mean, you wouldn't overflow the sea because it's just a cup of water into the
Mm.
sea.
Mm.
But if you do your gut microbiome testing, here we're talking about sh- shotgun metagenomics, or at least to the species level, and you know what you're missing from a precision perspective, supplementing what is missing is more likely to give you a benefit. When you hear a lot of people say, yeah, does this probiotic supplement actually work? Probably they don't work for the people that don't actually need them. I mean, if you pour in a cup of water in a sea, you wouldn't see a difference. But if you pour in a cup of water in a smaller cup of water, empty one, you would see that this cup is actually being
Mm.
filled, right? And that's what I believe, in my opinion, but just taking a probiotic, maybe, yeah, yeah, probably a placebo effect. Say, okay, I'm gonna take a probiotic just to improve my health and so on. It might work, might not work. But if you're actually missing a function or missing a microbe, you rather test that and see what is actually missing to supplement with it. After that, however, taking a prebiotic, for instance, this is the food of the bacteria. I don't think you need to test for that, right? So, because that's literally what the bacteria would need to actually thrive. This is I would recommend, honestly.
Mm.
Probably not for everybody, except when we're looking into people suffering from IBD and IBS. It will be tricky for these people. Some of them tolerate, some of them don't. So maybe for that, speak with your microbiome expert or with your doctor, GI, if they have knowledge on that. There are some prebiotics that you can and some that you might not be able to take in the case of IBD and IBS. But in general, healthy people, they can take prebiotics without any issue. They don't need to consult with anybody. I mean, they wouldn't kill you, and they probably just make your gut bacteria more healthier, and they promote these beneficial bacteria. But try to research what you're taking, and then take something that is proven clinically that is actually do something, then just take something random from Amazon and so on.
Yeah. So another thing I just want to add here, probably you can also ratify that. So what I've seen is that, especially in the case of our customers, I'll take examples. When you mentioned about iron, right? So John, there's a customer who came almost until a year and a half back, right? And he had eczema issues, like skin redness and skin scratches, right? And then doctor told that he has a lot of iron deficiency, right? And he was taking a lot of iron pills, right? And what we found that he lacked a specific bacteria which was responsible for absorbing iron, right? Like Lactobacillus
Mhm.
fermentum, right? And a lot of these iron tablets and pills and it was overloading, and as you rightly pointed out that it was causing that they were getting stored in the skin, and it was causing eczema, and it can also feed salmonella and a lot of these bad bugs, right? So essentially that's what we found, that even supplementing within mineral or the vitamin, you really need to understand your microbial function, right? Second thing, even if we are thinking, because what is happening is what I found that even if based on the gut microbiome testing, you're taking a particular probiotic, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes it may lead to gut dysbiosis because it may lead to a higher proportion of a particular strain, right? Which may dominate the ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
So that is what I feel that, probably probiotic is something, as you said rightly, that gut microbiome testing is really, really important, right?
Yeah.
And even prebiotic really to understand. So for instance, if someone says take inulin, right? So how we look at it, inulin, probably you have a low biotic production, so let's take inulin. So the biggest or the most beneficial thing is a lot of people grab is spinach, right?
Mhm.
Spinach is high in inulin, and
Yeah.
but the folks who have very suboptimal oxalate metabolism, right? Spinach is bad, right?
Totally.
So
Totally.
that's why, it's really, really, so for people to understand that whether I should take inulin or resistant starch, I should take spinach or leeks or maybe okra, right? It all actually depends upon the various other functions, right? So
Very, very,
that is,
totally.
yeah. So that is what probably that what I feel, that is what we have seen from our, customers, what we have serviced, right? So that is one thing. Lastly, I want to take one more question before we sign off today, is that there's a lot of, news around it that should we take antibiotics with probiotics or should we wait, right? There are mixed bag opinion about it, that, in the morning take probiotics, in the evening take antibiotics, and it will actually uh, balance it, or probably it will help you, right? So what is your view on that?
I think, as you said, there is mixed of ideas and opinions in there, and there is even a recent meta-analysis study. I think they've looked at several hundreds of studies that basically showing, looking at whether taking probiotics within before or after taking an antibiotic would improve your recovery from the antibiotic treatment and so on. So what someone need to understand that we don't have all the starting microbiota. So if my microbiome and yours is different. So if I might take amoxicillin, it might completely destroy my microbiota, and I know that because I've felt it before. But maybe if you take amoxicillin, the impact of your microbiota might be lower. So this means that in two case scenarios, your microbiota might recover afterwards well by itself. It heals itself because your microbiota is robust enough to be able to heal itself after that kind of um, atomic bomb that you throw on with antibiotics. But my microbiota will not be able to do so because I need to support it because it's not that robust enough. So it depends basically on the starting microbiota, whether the probiotic supplementation will be able to add a benefit or not. If your microbiota is more sensitive to the antibiotics, and again, it also depends on what type of antibiotics you're using. There are some narrow spectrum, there are some wide spectrum, and so on. I would love to see a study or studies basically that basically assess the impact of the different antibiotics available today on the market, let's say by categories, not by brand, because there will be an indefinite quest to actually do that, but by categories of antibiotics, the impact of on the microbiota, and afterwards supplementing with probiotics before taking the antibiotic and after taking the antibiotic. What I would say, regardless, taking a probiotic, in my opinion, better take a multi-strain probiotic, not just one strain, simply because when you shoot the antibiotics, you wouldn't know which bacteria is affected, right? You wouldn't know what the impact will happen. But taking a multi-strain probiotic, if it doesn't do you good, it will not harm you. Simply because at least with enabled some transition from some states. Ideally, in my opinion, based on the studies I've read, ideally you take it the day or one day after you take the antibiotics, simply because if you're taking probiotics during the antibiotic course, which is usually between 7 to 10 days, I mean, the probiotic you're taking, they're also susceptible to the antibiotics you're taking. So maybe you just like you just kill in what you're actually taking at the same time. So I would finish the antibiotic course and then take the probiotic supplementation to help in the recovery process, but ideally a multi-strain just to enable a better recovery.
Yeah, yeah, that's I agree, and what I also feel that when we are taking antibiotics, right, we on average wipe out 60-70% of our microbiome depending upon how each individual diversity is, right? So it can be as high as 90%, as low as 40%, as or maybe 60-70%, right? But when we are doing that and we are taking probiotics, we actually that's what you said, right? We take multi-strain probiotics, right? If when you take a single probiotic, probably you make a particular strain dominate the entire ecosystem, right? And then
Yeah.
it start doing dysbiosis and they will still start other problems,
Totally.
right? So this is really, really important to understand, because I've seen people in India, doctors generally recommend, probiotics and antibiotics together, right? Which I feel is to a larger population is a disaster, right?
Yeah.
That's what I feel, So it was great, Dr. Amin, to have your views,
Thank
and
you.
really had a great session with you. I really liked it, and I really feel that we should have these more often, right? We can connect, we can do sits, so we can do such. So probably I usually do talk talk on every Tuesday, right? So probably we can fix up sometime. We can have more discussion. So like a lot of other myths around it, which I was thinking probably we can discuss. One is the role of artificial sweeteners, right?
Yeah.
Right. Both on the oral and the gut microbiome, right? And then the NAT plus and NMN supplements, right? Which is again you know the I'm it's banned in Europe, right? The NAT supplements.
Yeah, no, to be honest, I don't have a lot of grasp on the market size and so on, but I think it's also one of the elements as well here in Europe as well.
Yeah, because in India it's being sold, right? And that's a bigger problem here, because just to have an anti-aging formula, or maybe having in high
Yeah,
energy levels, people are falling for NAT plus supplements and NMN supplements,
totally.
right? So we can discuss that also, right? Maybe next series, right? It was great talking to you, and thanks again, Dr. Amin, for
My pleasure.
accepting our request and having a great discussion.
My pleasure. No, thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed the questions as well. And again, if we can raise more awareness about the topic, we will always do so.
Sure, great. Have a great day ahead, and
Thank you.
signing off now. Yeah. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Take care. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.